On April 7, 1994, what should have been a routine cargo flight from Memphis to San Jose turned into one of the most violent and unbelievable fights for survival in aviation history. FedEx Flight 705, a McDonnell Douglas DC-10 carrying only 3 flight crew members, lifted off the runway just after 3 p.m., climbing smoothly through the warm Tennessee sky. But inside the aircraft was a 4th man, Auburn Calloway, a former Navy pilot and FedEx Flight engineer who had boarded the flight as a jump-seater. What the crew didn't know was that Calloway was armed with hammers and a spear gun, and he had a desperate plan: to hijack the aircraft, kill everyone on board, crash the plane, and make it look like an accident so his family could receive his life insurance payout. Minutes after takeoff, as the DC-10 settled comfortably into its climb, First Officer Jim Tucker, Captain David Sanders, and Flight Engineer Andy Peterson were discussing routine checklists. Nothing felt unusual. But Calloway had already disconnected the cockpit voice recorder circuit breaker to erase evidence of what he was about to do. At around 20,000 feet, with the crew relaxed and focused ahead, he burst forward from the jump seat with 2 heavy hammers in his hands. The first strike hit Peterson, cracking his skull. The second and third blows were aimed at Captain Sanders, leaving deep head wounds and dropping him from his seat. Tucker tried to turn, confused and shocked, but Calloway slammed a hammer into his head with brutal force. The cockpit exploded into chaos. Blood hit the instrument panels. The aircraft shook as Tucker's hands slipped off the yoke. Yet somehow, even with a fractured skull and severe brain injury, he remained conscious enough to fight. Calloway swung again and again, screaming, trying to inflict fatal blows before the crew could react. But the pilots fought back with a desperation few people can imagine at 20,000 feet. Tucker, an ex-Navy fighter pilot with reflexes most humans don't possess, made a split-second decision that would either kill them all or save the crew. He threw the DC-10 into a violent negative-G maneuver, forcing the plane downward so hard that Calloway lost his balance and floated upward toward the ceiling. The cockpit became a battlefield where gravity could not be trusted. Sanders, bleeding heavily, managed to get back into his seat. Peterson, half-conscious, tried to restrain Calloway from behind. All 3 men were fighting for their lives in a cockpit soaked with blood while the massive cargo jet plunged thousands of feet in seconds. But Tucker wasn't done. He flipped the aircraft again, sending it into a steep climb, this time forcing Calloway down onto the floor with crushing G-forces. Every maneuver was meant to keep the attacker off balance long enough for the pilots to survive. Alarms screamed. The structural limits of the aircraft were being pushed far beyond their design. The DC-10 creaked and shook violently, but Tucker had flown through combat training. He knew exactly how far he could push the machine before it broke. Meanwhile, Peterson managed to wrestle Calloway into a hold despite his own skull injuries and broken bones. Together, the crew overpowered him, restraining him with belts and cargo straps. But they weren't safe yet. Far from it. Tucker was barely conscious, losing blood, and the plane had suffered severe control damage from the extreme maneuvers. Yet while drifting in and out of awareness, he leveled the aircraft and turned it back toward Memphis. Air traffic controllers could hear the panic and shock in Tucker's voice as he called for immediate landing clearance. The runway was cleared, emergency crews were dispatched, and the DC-10, now sliced with red streaks of blood across the cockpit, approached far too fast and far too heavy. But Tucker had no choice. With a final surge of focus and determination, he forced the aircraft down, guiding 50 tons of wounded metal back onto the runway. The landing was hard, violent, but it worked. FedEx Flight 705 survived, and the 3 pilots who were supposed to die in the sky had done the impossible. They saved their plane, saved each other, and lived through one of the most savage attacks ever recorded on a commercial aircraft. Every one of the crew members suffered skull fractures, brain injuries, and permanent physical damage, yet all 3 survived. Later, investigators learned the truth behind Calloway's plan. He was facing termination from FedEx, drowning in debt, and had fully intended to kill the crew, crash the plane, and make it look like a tragic accident. His plan failed because of the extraordinary bravery and skill of the pilots he tried to murder. For their actions, Tucker, Sanders, and Peterson received some of the highest honors in aviation history, and their story remains one of the most astonishing examples of human resilience under unthinkable pressure.